Welcome back to another episode of Let's Talk About Human Rights, the show in which we discuss all things related to human rights. I'm your host, Jules Allender, and I am part of the California chapter of Youth for Human Rights International. Youth for Human Rights International's purpose is to enlighten and educate people around the world on what their human rights are, with the specific focus on the United Nations Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And with this, education to enable and inspire the youth of today as our leaders of tomorrow to stand up and secure these rights for themselves and all people on earth. For each show, we like to take up one right and try to broaden your understanding of how this right is important to you and your loved ones. For today's show, we will be looking at human right number 9, which states, "No one shall be subjected to arbitrary arrest, detention, or exile." Let's take a look at a short video about this specific human right.
Anybody out there? This isn't right. Somebody just tell me what I did, please. Can somebody just tell me? God, I should talk to somebody. Let me go.
Let's examine these ideas a little more closely. Nobody has the right to put us in prison without good reason and keep us there, or to send us away from our country. In civilized countries and political systems, the right to a public trial has been recognized as a basic right for every individual prior to any kind of incarceration. Too often in tyrannical societies, prison is used as a way to silence opposition. It is a method of controlling people by threatening them with a loss of freedom, by using the excuse that it is their behavior that is the problem, that their behavior is endangering society. What is missed is that the unrest is created by prior injustices committed by the existing leaders. And it is that behavior that needs to change, not the behavior of the average citizen who protests a bad government. The idea that any prison sentence must be preceded by a fair and public trial is the protection the average citizen has from this kind of tyrannical behavior. Societies are diverse and varied. The ideas that roam through all societies are equally diverse. Freedom is the right to express those ideas and to listen to them and form your own opinion. Freedom is the right to change your mind after hearing another's opinion, or not change your mind despite the good argument another gave you. But using the threat of incarceration to change others' mind or a way of thinking has nothing to do with freedom. For this reason, the United Nations Declaration on Human Rights includes no unfair detainment as one of the basic freedoms all human beings should enjoy. But there are lots of types of prisons. When a prison is mentioned, we may think only of the police and jail of bars and barbed wire. Large institutions that warehouse bad people who have been convicted justly in a court system. These institutions are controlled by the police and the court systems. But that is just one type of prison. There is also the whole of the psychiatric industry that has its institutions and methods of jailing someone, either physically or with drugs. Did you know that anyone can be brought in front of a judge and deprived of all their rights without having ever committed a crime? This is a subject of involuntary commitment. In this scenario, If your behavior is deemed inappropriate or unacceptable, the state can commit you to a psychiatric institution with no determination on when you will be released or how you can pursue your freedom. In essence, your rights have been turned over to a doctor who now acts on your behalf. This doctor is paid as long as you are in their care, so there is a built-in conflict of interest here. The problem is the care that is given is for the most part heavy psychotropic drugs, which in themselves incapacitates the individual further and makes them more dependent upon the institution for their survival. This creates a cycle of mental deterioration that further justifies institutionalization and then more drugs and more institutionalization. Prisons, as necessary as they are in our current society, are supposed to be places where we can hold people who have acted in a way that damages and endangers society until they can be rehabilitated enough to re-enter society. That people are not rehabilitated but rather punished is often overlooked. For most people, the idea of losing their human rights for a period of time and being incarcerated is a strong enough deterrent to curb antisocial behavior, meaning the justice system works on them. But then there are those that no amount of penalty or threat will stop them from acting in a manner that is damaging to others. By damaging another, I am talking about real physical harm or stealing, not having an opinion that you or another believes is harmful. It is these people that are beating or killing people or stealing and damaging others' property that necessitates a prison system. And the simple truth is, it is these people who also need rehabilitation. There is no real evidence that simply incarcerating a person who has committed serious offense against society that they live in will stop or change their behavior simply by being punished. Yet there is plenty of evidence that they, once released, will continue to act in the same manner that put them in prison in the first place. Recidivism is the phenomena of a convict going back out into society and committing more crimes only to be caught and returned to prison. Per the American Justice Department study released in March of 2022, 10 years after release, 82% of state prisoners had been arrested again, an average of nearly 7 arrests each. The majority of those prisoners, 62% of them, had also returned to prison. This is empirical evidence that simply incarcerating another human being has not and will not change our society for the better. So then, what is a society to do? It would be folly to just allow criminals to run around threatening the average person who is trying to just raise a family and do their job. But fortunately, I have as a guest today someone who has asked some of these questions and has come up with some very good answers. He has worked with the criminal justice system of his country and others to bring about a rehabilitation of the criminal within the prison system so that when they finally do re-enter society, they become a contributing member of society. My guest today is Greg Capozorio, who is a spokesperson and works for the organization called Criminon. Welcome, Greg. Thank you for being here today.
Hi, Jules. My honor to be here. Thank you very much for the introduction.
Yeah, you're very welcome. So why don't you go ahead and tell us about Criminon?
Well, Criminon means no crime, like criminon. So it means it's taking the two words criminon and no crime. And the purpose is to restore the self-respect of the individual. We use the methodologies of Mr. L. Ron Hubbard in doing that, and we use his secular works. And the first thing we work on is getting the individual to have their own realization about their own personal self-respect. It's a very interesting phenomena that occurs when an individual restores his self-respect, because the one thing that's wrong with every criminal in this universe or on this planet, right, is they have a loss of self-respect. Sometime in their life, they lost their self-respect. And it doesn't matter the category of crime. It really doesn't matter whether it's a terrible crime, genocidal, or just a simple, excuse me, jaywalking or something continually, or petty theft or stuff like that. There's a loss of self-respect that individual decided upon at some point, okay, and then has now, has been incarcerated, has come out, has gone back into prison, has never really successfully handled this life of crime. And so what Criminon does is it's an education-based program. We're around the world. We've been going since the early 70s, and we are a nonprofit organization, a 501c3 here in the US. And we do that every day, 24/7. We have guys on courses in the majority of prisons throughout the US. In South Africa, where I'm from, we spread it around the country. And there are numerous countries around the world that use this. And again, I just want to reinstate, it's education-based. The individual, the prisoner, studies at his pace. We ensure he understands the words. We ensure he understands the concepts. And then he has to actually then practice these principles in restoring his self-respect, so that you have an individual who will not commit crime again because he actually respects himself. What has been found is that individuals who have no self-respect don't reform, because why should they? If they don't respect themselves, why should they respect anybody else? They don't respect their own family. They don't respect their friends. So Criminon does that with this education-based program.
That's awesome. And it sure does make a lot of sense when, an individual has to start with themselves before they can then look beyond themselves and give self-respect to somebody else. And so, it just makes a lot of sense on how it starts there and then evolves into others and things around the individual. And so how did you get involved with Criminon?
Very interesting story. In South Africa, we had the apartheid, the segregation government, which was just the worst thing you could ever do to a country. And people of all color were affected by this. It affected all people, of all cultures and all color in South Africa. And so then when we did get our democratic freedom, and elected a democratically elected government, and the new government took place, the disparity in the standard of livings for the past 40 years started showing up in the amount of crime that started just prevailing in this society. And it became like a day-to-day thing where it got to such a point where the police wouldn't fine you if you ran a traffic light late at night. You could slow down, but if you didn't stop at a red traffic light, you wouldn't get into trouble because of the amount of carjacking, the amount of house break-ins. So it became, at a point in the late 90s, South Africa, our murder rate was 5 times the international standard. Now, as a born and raised South African who just loves this country, loves the people are incredible. We have incredible people in South Africa, very spiritual, very traditional, very, very respectful of elders, respectful of themselves. So how I got involved was seeing how bad the crime scene was, seeing the success of Criminon, and then deciding to just go into the prison system and start offering this service to these men and women, and surprisingly, how engaged they got. It was actually very remarkable. And we were able to, within 2 years, we were in 26 institutions, and I think there's like 97. But just being in 26 institutions, the crime stats were released for the first time in 10 years because the government saw that the crime was going down, that the crime had started going down for the first time in 10 years. And it was date coincident with us starting Criminon and getting it into the prison system. Because what we realized, I'll just tell you this as well, Jules, what we realized and what, speaking to correctional officials, it's like you get so much data, day-to-day real talk and real statistics from these men and women that work in the prisons that you never get out in the, in the narrative out in society. And that is that, these men are apathetical before you offer them a workable solution. And then once they got this workable solution, they grabbed at it with both hands and just were like, we need more of this. I was getting phone calls from prisons like, hey, We heard you were delivering in this prison. You need to come to this prison. Here's the social worker's number. Give her a call right now. And it was just this incredible avalanche. But it's also indicative of South Africans and their willingness to just get along, and also not to be slaves to their own, previous cultures, previous, condition, because the majority of South Africans were oppressed for, decades, and it was ugly. It was horrible. I hated it. A lot of, practically, 98% of the country hated it, but we endured it. And when we got a breakthrough, we were going to seize this opportunity. And I just didn't like the fact that we had seized this opportunity to become the rainbow nation, like a rainbow of all colors and all creeds, and we're going to get along. And then crime starts damaging that whole dream. And I just could not sit back and watch that.
Well, that's quite a story. But, it's amazing. And to speak about a culture so built on, fundamentals and respect, and to see it go astray from that, but then being able to insert those values back into the culture and see it then prosper and flourish, and the crime rate going down. So that's just very cool. And you may have answered this, but I'm curious on what your observations were when you first entered the different prisons. You touched on it a little bit, like the criminals, they, once they got a hold of it, like they really wanted it, and they wanted to, help themselves and help others. But beyond that, was there like an observation that you had entering these different prisons that you went, okay, this is it, or something like that?
Yeah, for sure. The thing was, first of all, when I first visited prison, I had this idea that prisons were, once you were in a prison, it was very organized and very almost. I had the idea that it was ran like kind of like the military, right? Where you have a schedule, you get up, you make your bed, you clean your cell, you go to breakfast, you then go and do, I don't know, work or something, and everybody's kept busy. And that's not how it is in the prison. I was astounded at how criminal these men were still being. It's an interesting thing. Mr. Hubbard wrote an article called Colleges of Crime, where he said that in prison, a man goes to prison and he becomes a better criminal. And that's what I observed, because the first thing I smelled, Jules, it was so funny. I go to the prison for the very first time, and I walk in with the chaplain, and the first thing I smell is marijuana. And I'm like, but that's illegal. How can you be smoking marijuana in a prison, right? And I nudged the chaplain and I said to him, hey, sir, can you smell that? And he looked at me in apathy and he says, oh, you get used to it. And that's when I was like, no, I didn't say that to him, but I was like, I'm going to handle this, because this is not how it should be, right? So I'll tell you, in answer to your question, I saw the apathy of these men and women, how apathetical they were, how hopeless they were. And when I briefed them and I gave them, it was interesting. They weren't looking for solutions. The first 50 men that I briefed, it was myself in front of 50 rapists, murderers, gangsters, car thieves, you name it. And they were there just to get out of the cell. They were not there to listen to me or to do a course. And the chaplain actually said, they're just going to sit you, and after 15 minutes, they're going to get up and walk out. So it was upon me to get these guys interested. So what I did was I just got them to give me their ruin. Like, what is ruining them? What is making these guys' lives misery even while they're in prison? Because prison is miserable already. So what's making it worse? And that approach and an unreasonable but unjudgmental, like I said to them, I have zero interest in your crimes. And I want your responsibility. I need you guys to help me change this country. And I'm telling you now, Jules, giving them a purpose was incredible. I briefed those 50 guys, and within 4 weeks, I had 200 guys in the same prison on course, actually interested. They kept on signing up their cellmates. These guys were like, I went there week 1, 50 guys. And, there was a huge illiteracy problem, So I'm thinking, okay, from the first 50, when I go back next week, there'll be maybe 10. I went back next week, there were 100, because the 50 guys there the week before had actually told their cellmates and had actually done the precept that we had covered. Now I'm talking about a precept based on the book The Way to Happiness, written by Mr. Hubbard. And it's basically a common sense guide to better living. And the first precept is it's a definition of happiness, and then take care of yourself. Wash, bathe, brush your teeth, stay healthy, eat, sleep. And it was just so basic to these men, but it resonated. Like, here's something that they can do and something that works. And from that point on, it was just like a wildfire. It was incredible. I'll never forget. I'm going to add, I'm giving you more data to answer your question.
I love it. Keep going. It's all good.
Okay. So I'll never forget after about 4 weeks, I went, I was going to the prison, and we were getting, the first prison that I went to, we were getting like 30 to 40 signups every week, and we were like, wow, this is amazing. And I called the guys together and I asked them, I said, hey, why do you guys like Criminon so much? What is it about Criminon? And they thought it was, I was being, I was trying to find out if something was wrong. And I was like, no, this is great that you like it. I just want to know why. And it's so interesting. It's still very emotional just to think about it. And the leader of the leader stepped forward and he said to me, Greg, I'll tell you why. He said, every day before you arrived with the Way to Happiness, with Criminon and the Way to Happiness, every day the guards would tell us that we're evil, we need to be punished, and we deserve the punishment that we're getting. Every day the psychs would say we have to be drugged, we have to receive this treatment because we don't know how to take care of ourselves. And unfortunately, he said, every day the religions, different church groups that come and tell us if we don't convert to their religion, we're going to go to their kind of hell. So he said, we were hopeless. And then you came in with the Way to Happiness and gave us hope.
Wow. Yeah. I mean, incredible, every aspect that you touched on there. But the very last thing you just said in terms of, this enforced way of doing things, it made me think, one is when you treat someone like an animal, obviously, what you're going to get. You're going to get, yeah, right, more animalistic, more survival of the fittest. I'm going to do what I need to survive. And that's going to include crimes and things of that nature. And we know when someone starts down that path, it's just a snowball effect. But then when you treat them like a human being and you give them a purpose, like you said, and you educate them and give them choices, it's like, oh yeah, you're just giving them knowledge and self-determinism, and man is basically good. We do know that, yep, right? And then the goodness is what we acknowledge and what we, grant life to. It's going to continue. And I think it takes the complexities out of all of theories and shoulda, coulda, wouldas, and gives a simple approach to, educate, treat them like actual human beings, don't violate their human rights, and you're going to see change. So, just incredible. And then speaking on that human rights point, and I think you touched upon this a little bit, but how did they view the prisoners view human rights of others and even their own, when you first entered prison?
Jules, as far as they were concerned, they had no rights. Like they were a ward of the state, and they were just going to get shifted around or told what to do. And obviously they're rebelling, and obviously they've got their own held, fixed, stuck, stubborn viewpoints of, this is what I am, this is what I do, or I'm on drugs, I don't know how to get off, so this is what I do to get drugs. And they do unspeakable stuff to each other. But once they get a glimpse of their own decency, it changes everything. But these men, really, they didn't think they had any rights. They had the right, their basic right was just to continue living as a criminal. I'll never forget what the leader of the prison that I spoke of earlier, this guy, when he first said to me, I'll never forget, you'd gotten through 10 lessons of the first course, and in front of the group on the one Friday morning, he says to me, I don't want to do this anymore. This is making my brain turn inside out. So I didn't make him wrong. I just said, okay, how come? What do you mean? Just tell me. So he says, well, everything that I'm doing in prison is against what you're saying in the Way to Happiness. And in the Way to Happiness, we're saying, take care of yourself, don't be promiscuous, love and help children, seek to live with the truth, don't do anything illegal, honor and help your parents, all common sense stuff. And I said to him, okay, so tell me what you're doing. He says, well, I organize all the drugs in the prison. I organize all the weird stuff we do in the prison. If you want something taken care of out of prison, somebody dealt with, I organize that. So everything I do is against what you're saying to do. And I was like, wow, I had no idea. Well, it kind of made sense. What Mr. Hubbard said was, prisons are colleges of crime. But the only thing he was focused on was his right, I suppose, his right to live and his right to continue to be a criminal. Even though it wasn't a right, but in prison, he was at home. He was at home in prison. Okay, he was a married man. He had 3 kids. I only found that out afterwards. But his story is one massively huge success story, because I said to him, okay, you've done 10 lessons. I get it. Why don't you just complete the course? And if you don't like it, and this is so funny, Jules, I don't know why I said this. Maybe it was to motivate him. I said, if you don't like it, come and punch me in the face. Afterwards, I was like, why did I say that? But so he said, okay. And I tell you, 2 weeks later, I went back to the prison, and there's this guy. And he was an incredible gentleman. Like, he was really, he just turned his life around. There he was running around, collecting the lessons, having them ready for me. And I said to him, so how's it going? And he's like, well, let me tell you this. Before I started the Criminon course, I had my own cell. I had a 2-man cell to myself. Now, usually in the prisons, they stack the guys, 5, 10 guys to a 2-man cell. Right? If it's a 1-man cell, they put 5 guys in there, right? And he had his own cell for 2 by himself. And he says, so this is what I did. I moved out of my cell into a communal cell, which has got 30 guys. And I was like, okay, why did you do that? And he looks at me and he says, what do you mean? I said, why did you do that? He said, Greg, everybody needs to do the Criminon program. And I'm going to make sure I get everybody to do it. And I was like, wow, 2 weeks ago, he hated this. It was destroying it was messing with his lifestyle of being a criminal. And bam, on his own. I didn't tell him to change. The guards didn't tell him to change. He was studying and seeing how he could regain the things that are native to himself. Just innate human rights, his own human decency. And he was restoring that himself, right? I mean, then he tells me he's married and he's got 3 kids. And I was like, you're kidding me, right? I didn't make him wrong. I was just like, wow, okay. And he wanted me to, it was a great story. He wanted me to help him, he's going to write his wife a letter. And I said, okay, do you want me to help you? And he said, yes. So I asked him to show me the letter. So he shows me the letter, and it's a very, very nice letter. But I looked at the letter and I said to him, Ish, his name was Ishmael. I said, Ish, how many times have you been to prison? And he told me. I said, how many times have you broken her heart? And he told me, he said, I bet you've promised her every time. You've promised her that you're going to change, right? And he's like, yeah. I said, don't send this letter. I said, if it was me, if I was your wife, I would break into this prison and smack you. Right? Like I gave him that type of viewpoint. And I said, what I want you to do is write her a letter based on like good roads, good weather. Give her information that she can have, not one that makes her mad at you, So he listened to me, and it took 3 months for her to start answering. But once he got them answering, then one day, I'll never forget, he comes to me, he's like shaking like a leaf, and he says to me, I said, what's up? He goes, oh, my wife's coming to visit me tomorrow. And I said, so why are you so nervous? He's like, I don't know what she's going to think of me. I don't know what to do. I'm like, Ish, are you the same guy that came into prison, or who are you now? And in 1 second, he just looked at his past and he went, you're right. And she came and visited him. Within a couple of months, he was able to bring the kids. And within 2 years, he was released on good behavior. And he started his own business. Wow. And he actually, this guy went on national television on his own accord and promoted criminal rehabilitation and Criminon. Wow. It was incredible, like just incredible.
Wow, that is an incredible story. I mean, to be able to change someone's viewpoint, a complete 180 degrees in going from organized crime within a prison to completely turned around and now promoting and recruiting and getting people on the straight and narrow. And again, I think it just goes back to that point that we both made earlier, is that, innately we as human beings want to do right, and obviously have a lot of
Yep.
self-respect. And when that is intact,
Yep.
we promote and do good things, and we feel good about ourselves. And when it's not, man, that snowball, that thing picks up speed so quickly, and there's not really brakes unless
Yeah.
someone like you and your organization comes in and gives individuals a second chance. Now, I have
Yeah.
a question again on human rights, and going back to the time of apartheid and what it did to, South Africa and things of that nature. And obviously this is a show, and Youth for Human Rights is centered around education of human rights. And when we educate individuals like you are doing inside prison systems, we give them power and control, and they can take more responsibility. And from your viewpoint, if there was greater education around human rights before that time, could that have prevented or stopped or slowed what occurred in South Africa?
100%. 100%. It would have changed the narrative. It was so interesting. The indoctrination of the South African people during those years, and I was born right at the beginning of that, and to actually have this indoctrination that man is based, his decency or his intelligence is based on his body or the color of his skin. And the indoctrination of that was so intense. You got it in the media, you got it in school, you got it in the government systems. And it was just this incredible indoctrination, which 98% of us were just like, this doesn't make sense. Mm-hmm. Because when we look at, for one example, I'll never forget for myself, I was like, okay, so this is what they're saying. And then you watch a TV show or a movie, and there's people of all color, and the black man or the black woman or the African, colored or whatever you wanted to call them, they were just as equal or sometimes smarter than a guy that was white. Don't want to bring up this difference, but it was just, when you're getting fed so much false information, you have to look for yourself. You have to look for yourself and see what's true for you, and that's the beauty of the UN Declaration of Human Rights. I wish it had the force of, maybe not the force of law, but just the fact that it would be made, if all those 30 human rights were being practiced, we would have a different civilization. We would have a different civilization. South Africa would never have gone down that route, because the majority, everybody would have been like, no, we're all equal under the law. We're all equal in everybody's eyes. Everybody has the right to life. You have the right to move. You have the right to produce. You have the right to your religion, your family, all those human rights. It would absolutely make the biggest difference. And I think you see it from your campaign, Jules, is you see where human rights education is pushed and promoted and extended and delivered in huge quantities. Those communities and those countries, they change, and they change for the better.
Yeah, exactly. It's definitely, these are the foundation to a society, right? And
Yep.
the more I talk to individuals who are operate in different realms or sections of the United Nations Declaration of Human Rights, whether it be religious freedom, freedom of expression, no slavery with human trafficking and child sex trafficking, right? When we get to the basics of society, before we put anything else on top, human rights and the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which is put out by the United Nations, is step zero, right? And
Yep.
it is
Agreed.
innate, it is there, it is to be upheld in every country, in every section, in every culture, in every demographic across the planet. And as you have seen, the faster we can educate and the faster we can get these principles out, the better society becomes, right? But until that point, because it's interesting, because there are some religions, and I don't think any religion is bad or one's better than the other or anything like that, but there's religious beliefs that can brink a little bit on, are we upholding all of the fundamental human rights, out of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And it's kind of, how do we marry those things, and how do we bring to light that these are the foundations of society, and then we can build upon that. And
Yeah.
you know, but we've seen, you know, obviously this came out in 1946 after we've had World War II and complete genocides of cultures and religions. And then, you know, the fight we have continually, like you are, day in and day out, to like, no, this is what needs to happen. Everyone has these rights, no matter where you are. So it's a fight.
It is. It is. And it's interesting. I just, you know, as you said that about coming out in 1946, I was just like, wow. Well, I know the world's not perfect, but we haven't had a third world war.
Right.
So that document, that's those 30, you know, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, has actually worked to that degree that we haven't had an all-out third world war. I know there's lots of wars around on the planet, but we haven't gone on an all-out thing of, okay, you know, the one side versus another, and let's try and annihilate each other. So I just was like, wow, that it's worked to that degree, because it probably gives man, you know, it gives man that hope. And it's just like I said to you, you know, the guys in prison had no hope, and you know, the guys that you know, that are in prison, unless they're doing something like Criminon, you know, something that will restore their self-respect. You know, being hopeless is horrible.
Yeah.
There's no future. You don't think of what are you going to do tomorrow, what you're going to do the next day, what are you going to do in 5 years' time, how's your family going to feel, what are your friends. It's just hope. You know, it hit me like a ton of bricks. I'll never forget driving back home from that prison visit, and I was like, this is changing my life. Getting these men's viewpoint of what their life was like, and seeing the perpetrators of the hopelessness. And it wasn't necessarily them, you know, it wasn't necessarily them. It was the psychs. It was, you know, some correctional officials who are not there for the best interests, you know, and I understand that. I understand the anger and the frustration, or the temptation to hate when somebody commits a crime. I understand that 100%. But I also realized, you know, that if we don't extend our hand to help, we personally even are not going to be better. Personally, we won't be better if we don't extend our hand to help. And if we don't show the tolerance that we would expect when we err. You know, when we make mistakes, we expect to be like, gosh, I made a mistake, you know, or I messed this up, whatever. Please don't be too mad at me. I will try and fix it. You know, it's usually not very malicious. I'm not saying there isn't maliciousness at times, but it's usually not. You know, so I so admire the work you do. I so admire the authors of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. I so admire Youth for Human Rights, and the fact that we're educating the tens of millions around this planet to make it a civilization that we can be proud of.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you for that. I as well admire what you do with Criminon, because it takes a tough-minded yet very compassionate individual to walk into prisons day in and day out and serve people who have committed horrific crimes and can see the good in them and know that, you know, deep down that's not who they are. And, you know, so
yeah,
I appreciate that.
For sure. You know, just one thing. Well, I just wanted to say one thing. You know, I know there is a percentage of guys, you know, male and female, who don't want to change. And I'm not there to convince them to change. You know, it's like, okay, I have this to offer, take it or leave it. And the majority take it. And the ones that don't, okay, maybe we'll get them next time, or maybe they'll come around to it. Or maybe as all the decency and the self-respect and the camaraderie amongst the Criminon graduates or the guys working to improve themselves, as that increases, they may come around. But it's definitely the individuals who are willing to confront their own, you know, transgressions, and willing to, you know, to go, I do want to walk. I'll never forget one guy saying to me, he hated the fact that he had to sleep with one eye open every night. And I said to him, why? He says, because, well, I'm a gang leader, and I've got to keep an eye that some guy doesn't come into my cell to to try and kill me or beat me up. I've got to make sure my own guys don't try and want to take my leadership position. So can you imagine not having a good night's sleep for years in a prison cell? So he was just like, I'm done with this. And it's just interesting, like that guy as well. When he's got his life back together, they ended the prison violence in their prison from 1,087 gang fights a year down to 0 in 2 years.
Wow.
It's just incredible.
Yeah. Simply amazing. Simply amazing. Well, as we get to the close, and I wanted to find out if you have, what's on the horizon for you and Criminon, and then also include in that, if someone wanted to get involved and help, how would they go ahead and reach out to you?
Okay, well, I'll give you the data for the first one. To reach out to, about Criminon, just go to www.criminon.org. There's a website there. It's got all the data that Criminon has about Criminon, the Criminon groups around the world, where to sign up, who to contact, based on where you are. And on the horizon is to just keep expanding into the sector to help the Department of Corrections. The more on-site delivery we have, the more success we're getting. We have hundreds, if not thousands of, we call them graduates. Once the guy's on our course, we stop calling them an inmate, we call them students, even though they're still in prison, right? But we have students that have completed every course, and they then they do another, an advanced course to become instructors or tutors. So we have them delivering Criminon to their fellow inmates in prison. And we keep working on expanding that in Florida, for instance, where I am right now. We've got an incredible program that's had these graduates delivering and expanding the Criminon program on their own time in their prison facility. And it's the coolest thing. It's the correctional officials that make the call to say, how impressed they are and how much easier it is to work in the prison since these guys are Criminon graduates. There's no violence, they're respectful, they have their manners, they want to get along, there's no prison fights anymore. So, they benefit from it. So we're working at putting that in and getting, Criminon entrenched into correctional systems around the world, because we have to. It's just the prison systems I'm sorry to say this, but they're not successful at all. It's billions and billions and billions of dollars just on, incarceration, no correction.
Yeah, totally. Well, it's very cool that, you're getting actual students and graduates to then turn around and deliver, and it just goes to show, the power and the success. And so as we get to the last question, we ask every guest this final question, and that is, what is your favorite human right and why?
I like the one, responsibility. I think it's 29 or the last one.
30.
Because it is our responsibility to have everyone know their human rights. And it is our responsibility to practice those human rights. And it is our responsibility for each other and for ourselves, that we can actually be proud of ourselves, proud of our wives and children and parents and our, neighbors and our community leaders, because here's one incredible dream that I have, is that our civic leaders start reaching and using these human rights, because their, responsibility is a big thing, but it is so glorious when you are demonstrating responsibility. And there's a huge need for that in leadership around the planet. So that's my favorite one.
It's mine as well. Very fitting. Well, thank you so much for your time, one, for being on the show and for what you do. It's just, again, incredible work, and I'm sure the people who you've touched and who you've reached are very appreciative as well.
Well, thank you. And I thank you for the acknowledgement. It's been my pleasure. I love coming on here. It's great.
Absolutely.
Thanks, Jules.
You're very welcome. That's our show for this week. I hope you enjoyed today's episode and got to hear some incredible information on what Criminon is and how it works and how it can be used. And if you are interested or know someone who can benefit from that program, please do check out the website that Greg listed. As I interview these fabulous guests every week and hear the incredible work that they do on one of the 30 human rights out of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, I do find it very inspiring. And then I wonder, how are you going to pass this information on? How are you going to get involved? You can always reach out to us and check out our social media handles. Our Instagram and Twitter handles are at YHRCAL, and our Facebook is Youth for Human Rights California. Thank you, and until next time, I will see you then.